there is no deed which goes unpaid in a good way as well. We have to know that God has an accounting for us. Everything that we do, Hashem sees. Some is rewarded in this world, some in the next, some to our children, some to our grandchildren. Those are things which are greater than us. They're beyond us to know how and when and who we get rewarded by and how. This week, the Zera Shimshon speaks about a very troublesome and bothering episode in our Torah. This episode is known as the episode of a sotah. A sotah is loosely translated as a wayward wife. We'll speak exactly, we'll give a little bit of an introduction of what the theme line and the storyline of this scenario was, and what the Zera Shimshon brings out as a beautiful lesson from this. A sotah is a woman that her husband suspects her for engaging in an inappropriate or an illicit relationship. Now, after doing so, he warns her. The Talmud speaks extensively about that he has to warn her specifically about a specific person. For example, you're not allowed to be secluded with George, because he suspects that she might be getting a little too friendly, a little too flirty with him. So he tells her, hey, you are not allowed to be secluded with George. Now, after he does so, if she does not heed to his warning, and there are two witnesses that see her secluded with George for an amount of time which can lead to inappropriate relations, then she is now deemed a sotah. A sotah meaning a woman who has deviated off the path, being suspected to have committed adultery. What is done at that moment is a chance is given to her. She has a chance to say, you know what? You caught me, I'm wrong, and they divorce. Normally, a woman who is married, according to the Jewish law, and has a relationship with another man, if she's caught, she was, in the time of the temple, executed. That's severe. In the case of a sotah, she had a chance. Since no one actually saw something happen, it was just a very valid suspicion. She was suspected for it. She's able to, after being caught with witnesses that she was secluded with George, to say, okay, you caught me, I'm wrong, I confess. And then she would not be executed, but she would now have to divorce her husband and not allowed to marry George. If she doesn't admit whether she really committed a sin or if she didn't, now she's deemed a sotah. And her husband and her go up to Jerusalem to the temple, and they come to the Kohen. They present their case to the Kohen, and the Kohen would do the following. Take a parchment, write the Parashat of Sotah, which we find in this week's Torah portion, starting in chapter 5, verse 11. Would write the Torah portion of the sotah on a parchment and erase it, and the erasings of that Torah portion he would collect in a vessel, put some water and earth in there, everything natural ingredients, mix it up, and ask her one last time, this is your last chance to confess. And if she says, I did nothing wrong, she would drink this mixture. Again, this mixture has nothing more than water, erasings of black ink on parchment, and a little bit of earth. she would drink this. And the Torah tells us, if she was really guilty, she would die a gruesome death. The Talmud explains exactly how and what. We'll see if I'll share it a little bit or not. And if she didn't do anything wrong, she'd actually be blessed with many, many more healthy and happy children. I always say after I say that, that's if she wants to go back to her husband after the humiliation. This is the sotah. The Talmud also tells us that when the woman, if she was really guilty and she committed a crime, she committed adultery, at the same time that she would be dying, George, wherever he would be in the world, would also die. It's obvious that it was a supernatural intervention, a divine intervention by God, because there was no poison or no something special put in there except for the words of the Torah portion of this story, and a little water and a little earth, nothing special. Now, the Talmud goes and debates, did this story, this episode of a sotah ever happen or not? And there are those Chachamim of the opinion in the Talmud that it never really happened. It was just there as a warning, as a precaution. And others say no, that it actually did happen a couple times, and it was a very, very sad thing to see. Nevertheless, something greater than nature is taking place, and obviously it is God intervening. The commentaries show how important peace is between a husband and wife, that God says, when it is always prohibited to erase his name, he says, take the Torah portion of Sotah that has my name in it, God says, and erase it. Erase it leman hashalom. Erase it for peace. To show how important peace between a husband and wife is, that God says, erase my name. If that will prove peace, if that will prove to the husband, and the woman will drink it, and she does not die, and that will prove that she was really pure, and she did not commit adultery, erase my name, and let there be peace between a husband and wife, even after all this strife and these quarrels. It's a very, very powerful lesson. The Zera Shimshon jumps in, and he asks, the Talmud in Masechet Brachot tells us that anyone who tries to avoid giving the Kohen his portion that he deserves, again the Trumot, he will need to have to come to the Kohen for another reason. You know which reason that is, the Talmud says? Unfortunate reason of him having trouble with his wife, suspecting her to be a sotah, and having to come to the Kohen to give his wife to drink from the sotah waters. Again, the Talmud says, anyone who tries to avoid coming and giving to the Kohen the gifts that he deserves, you'll be forced to come to the Kohen for another reason. For a reason that you will be most unfortunate for having to come. The truth is, a couple weeks ago we saw something similar for a different aspect. We saw that anyone who avoids coming to the Kohen and bringing a birth offering, remember, a woman after she gives birth, she has to bring an offering, then you're going to have to come to the Kohen to evaluate your tzarat, your leprosy. Similar, the same way as if you miss and you try to avoid something there, you're going to be forced to go to it. Here too, you avoid giving the maaser, the trumot, to the Kohen, you're going to be forced to go to the Kohen for the unfortunate case of a sotah. This is what the Talmud says. The next piece of Talmud he brings is in Masechet Sotah. Masechet Sotah tells us that no individual will sin unless a ruach shtut, a spirit of foolishness, enters the individual, and that's what will cause them to sin. A person will not steal unless a spirit of foolishness enters them and steals. A person will not speak lashon hara unless that spirit of foolishness enters them and causes them. No person rationally wants to do something wrong. We all deep down want to do the right thing. We want to make God happy. We want to make our family happy. We want to feel good. We want to feel fulfilled. But People fall, people sin. We all have our shortcomings. Talmud says this only comes from a spirit of foolishness that enters an individual. The next portion of Talmud he brings is from Masechet Shabbat. Masechet Shabbat tells us, Aser te'aser. Give your charity, give your 10%. Aser kede shetit asher. Make sure to give your portion of charity in order to become more wealthy. This is what we spoke about. The more a person gives, the more a person gets. God endears us with a gift. He sees what we do with that gift. If we help others with it, He gives more. One last piece of Talmud he quotes, again from Masechet Brachot. He says, Talmud says, look at the difference between the previous generations and our generation. This is the Talmud already saying this. The previous generations would find ways to bring the produce into their homes that would obligate them to give the portion to the Kohen, to tithe the food and the produce. But the recent generations, the Talmud is saying, looks for loopholes to not have to tithe the produce. For example, after a certain amount of produce was put together, only then do you need to tithe it. And only if it comes in through the front door do you need to tithe it. So what would the later generations do? They would only bring up and bundle up small portions in. So it wouldn't be, for our terms, taxable goods or tithable goods. And what would they do? They'd bring in the produce through the ceilings and the roofs and through the windows, because it's not coming through the front door, in order to render the produce non-tithable, trying to avoid giving the charity. He says, look at the difference. And even though it's allowed, it's according to the letter of the law, but look at the difference between the previous generations and the current generations. With all this, the Zera Shimshon, with those 4 pieces of Talmud, which we're going to string together, the Zera Shimshon comes and explains a very cryptic verse that Shlomo HaMelech wrote in Mishle. I'll read you the verse, I'll translate it, and then I'll give the explanation, the fascinating explanation of the Zera Shimshon, tying in all 4 of those pieces of Talmud. Number 1 says, Ateret Chachamim Oshram, that the wise men, their wisdom is signified and their stature is signified by their wealth. Their crown of glory, their stature is their wealth. Very interesting. What does that mean? Next part of the pasuk, he says, Ivelet kesilim ivelet. But the foolishness of the fools is their foolishness. So 2 parts to this verse. The first part speaking about the glory and the crown of the wise men, wise people being their wealth, and the foolishness of the fool being their very own foolishness. So look how he explains. He says, a wise man, a wise individual who learned that the more you give, the more you get. That you're not supposed to avoid giving your charity, giving your trumot to the Kohen. He will see his reward in his wealth. Because the more you give, the more you get. He will see the blessing in his fruit. If you give some of your fruit away, you give some of your produce away, Hashem will send more. And in what you have, you'll have tremendous blessing, and you'll have more and more and more. That's what it means, Ateret Chachamim Oshram. And now the second part of a foolishness of a fool is their own foolishness, is because they know what they're supposed to do, but they're avoiding it. They're finding ways, as we say, a kombina, not how to pay their charity, not how to give it to the Kohen, not to come forth. And what's that going to lead them to? It's going to lead them to their own doom. It's going to lead them to their own issues, their own mishap, their own poverty, their own problems. And then how does the Zera Shimshon tie it together with the sotah? He says an individual who's going to avoid giving to the Kohen, he's going to avoid doing the right thing, avoid using his wisdom in order to bring peace between him and the Kohen. Unfortunately, he's now tampering the peace between him and God and him and the Kohen by not giving his produce, his tithe, his portion. He's going to unfortunately have problems at home. You think you're going to save? You think you're not going to have to go to the Kohen? You think you're going to save some money? You think you're going to save some time? You're going to have to go. You're going to have to go for something hard, something not so good. You're going to have to go for a sotah reason, for a wife who's off the track, a wayward wife. So there's no way to ever beat the system. This teaches us that in life there's processes, there's way to do things. You cannot learn how to run if you don't know how to crawl. You cannot learn how to fly a plane if you don't have a simple driver's license. There's certain things in life where you cannot skip. You cannot build the third floor if there's no foundation first and second. It's like that in everything in life. If you try to avoid giving charity, you think you're making, you think you have more, but unfortunately a person's really losing. There's no such thing as shortcuts in life. Every shortcut has its shortcoming, I always say. And it's not worth it. It's not worth it when it comes to marriage. There's no shortcuts. There's no quick fix for a marriage. Marriage is investment. Marriage is hard work. Marriage is preparation. Marriage is care. It's not like Mother's Day once a year you bring home a bouquet of flowers, anniversary you bring a piece of jewelry, and the birthday you write a card and you're good. You could check out for the other 362 days of the year. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way from husband to wife. It doesn't work like that from wife to husband. It's a constant, consistent, continuous investment in the relationship. Marriage is the greatest example. Any other relationship definitely needs attention as well. The relationship between us and God needs it as well. Even when it comes to learning Torah, sometimes people want to jump to mysticism and Kabbalah and deep, deep things. There's a reason why Chachamim say until you're 40, don't delve into that. Not because we're putting a number on the age. We're putting a basic amount of knowledge and experience. Not only life experience, but education in the basics of our Torah before you jump to those levels. Hebrew, Aleph Bet, Chumash, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Talmud, Halacha. You've got so much, you've got a life's worth of knowledge, of divine wisdom to learn before you delve into that. If you want to get there, the way you'll benefit most from that is if you take the steps along the way. It's very important in life. There's no shortcuts. You try to avoid the Kohen, you'll have to come to the Kohen. You try to avoid giving charity, it'll go elsewhere. You try to avoid hard work and effort, you'll have to put it in somewhere else. It might be down the line, it might hurt more, it will hurt more then, unfortunately. Remember that every shortcut has its shortcomings. And true, healthy growth comes with investment, with following a process. When it comes to the way we live as Jews, it's the process that the Torah and our Chachamim set out for us. When it comes to process in business, in building, there are things and ways that we need to do things in order for it to be straight, in order for it to be right, in order for it to be the most successful. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us, the merit of this week's Parashat, the merit of the Zera Shimshon, that we will understand that shortcuts are really going to come and follow with shortcomings, and working hard pays off, and not avoiding our obligations towards our Kohanim, towards our charity and obligations to Torah study, to children's schools, to poor people, to the needy, to our community. That type of charity is worth so much, and the blessings given back to it are tenfold, 100-fold, many times more. And Kadosh Baruch Hu bless us with a tremendous amount of happiness. And as the Mishnah in Masechet Avot says, Ezehu Ashir, who is the one that is wealthy, Hasamech Bechilko, one who is happy with their portion. That Hashem, being happy with our portion, being able to give, will be happy in the less important, in the financial realms, and more importantly, in our emotional, spiritual realms, and relationships with God, spouses, and our family.